just wanted to first do a quick thank you to Amy for inviting me, her enthusiasm, energy, and endless efforts on behalf of donkeys, and to Eric and Cynthia Davis for their help and support, and to thank everyone here for attending and listening to me. I have to say I'm not a veterinarian. I don't have any donkey expertise. So I'm just really happy and excited to be here and learn. I am an artist, a cultural thinker, a lecturer, and a professor in art and environmental justice. So I studied Chinese folk art at the Chinese Academy of Fine Art in Beijing. I also worked for UNICEF Beijing, doing exhibitions on China's social problems. And I grew up under the tutelage of a Chinese mom who made everything from our clothing to the furniture. So now back to donkeys. So, 10,000 live Madagascar turtles, 525 bear paws, 7,000 fully or partially taxidermied hawksbill turtles, 4,000 disemboweled pangolins, 248 helmeted hornbill bird beaks, 1,000 donkey skins with 4 tiger skins wrapped inside. Such is a mere sampling of recent confiscation and investigative reports on the trafficking of endangered species. This carnage of amputated parts of creatures dead, frozen, as well as whole, live, ravaged from our last wild spaces, from Canada to Chile, Myanmar to Mozambique. All for one reason, one destination, for Chinese demand. Heading to China, Hong Kong, overseas Chinese communities. Why? To satisfy the ravenous appetites of elite Chinese in their quest for power, status, and immortality, via the consumption of rare species for food, medicinal products, furniture, decorations, fashion accessories, and exotic pets. While China is not the only market for illegal wildlife, it is the world's largest. As an artist, cultural thinker, educator who identifies as Chinese, Chinese American, and someone who has a deep love for Chinese arts and culture, has lived, worked, and studied in China, and who believes in both Western medicine and the holistic healing qualities of Chinese herbal medicine and acupuncture, this extinction market and its use of Chinese culture as a validating shield is beyond appalling to me. It keeps me up at night and has catapulted me into doing this research. Oops, sorry, should have stated. I want to quickly mention that this image, it's something that I put together via Photoshop, really just to prove a point. So the background Chinese painting is actually my mom's painting. In the foreground, the ivory statues, which are Buddhist statues. To the left is Le Fo, the deity of happiness and laughter. On the right is Guan Yin, who's the deity of compassion and mercy. And these are ivory. I actually grew up with these ivory statues in the house. And I feel like it's the epitome, the contradiction, especially the Guan Yin, because she is supposed to be the one who perceives and hears everything, the cries of the poor, the needy. And then in the front are foreground images from Andrew Tocalo, who is known as an elephant whisperer. So the herd that she was studying was all slaughtered for ivory. Okay, so back to donkeys. So, as you can see here, there's no donkey. The donkeys are not part of the 12 zodiac animals. And it's believed that that's because in ancient China, there probably at the time, early ancient China, that there were no donkeys. And the donkeys came later. And the earliest historical text that mentions donkeys is in the Han Dynasty with Emperor Ling, who is said to have a carriage with 4 donkeys. And this is really unusual for an emperor to have a carriage with 4 donkeys and not horses. And he preferred donkeys. And that, of course, immediately raised the price up for donkeys. So early on, you already see the issue of donkey pricing. And we're talking about like 168 as far as the year. I want to mention in the front there, they might look a little donkey-like. That's a horse and a ram. And the one in the second row to the right, that's a snake. So, donkeys are found in the provinces north of the Yangtze River, mainly northeast and central China. I want to point out, see that dark, like black line, the thicker line? So that's the Yellow River. And then the thicker line down here, that's the Yangtze River. So it's above that line. Okay, so this line here, okay, so it's everything north, but mainly on the very top end, okay, right below Inner Mongolia. Oops, sorry. Okay, so donkeys were usually ridden by, when they did appear in China, donkeys were usually ridden by rural folk, minor officials, holy men, and hermits. And much like the rest of the world, donkeys were considered stupid and then associated with people of a lower social class and lower economic class. Of note is this Taoist hermit of the Tang Dynasty, which is 1618 to 907. And you can see he's writing backwards. And he did this on purpose, and it was to show to people that in their surge and their urge to go forward and to gain more wealth and to get all those possessions, and this is early on as a concept, he was saying that actually you're going backwards. And then in order to go really forwards emotionally, spiritually, he was telling people he was writing backwards as a demonstration, that you need to reverse your path and follow a spiritual path. So I think that this is really, in the scheme of today's world, that this is really notable. Okay, so back in the 90s, as part of the Central Academy, we were spending time in northeast China in the Yellow River Plateau area, in Shanxi provinces. These are, at one point, would be considered the cradle of Chinese civilization, but now are the poorest parts of China. And at that time, back in the 90s, you were still finding people that were living in areas that had just gotten electricity, and still living in cave dwellings, which are ergonomically incredible because they're dug out of the earth, and so they keeps you warm. The earth itself is keeping you warm in the winter and cool in the summer, right? And if we look at those paper cuts on the paper windows, I think that's a donkey. I'm going to claim it's a donkey. So at that time, I was going in there really to look at the folk art. Okay, and again, as in the rest of the world, they're the beasts of the burden, doing all the workloads. Okay, I actually, we were there during the winter time, and I did not see any animals actually working on this. But to give you a sense, and the reason why people go there, especially artists, folk artists were going there in the 90s and the 80s, was because this is your last chance to see really authentic traditional folk crafts, because things were changing so rapidly. And you can see why they call it Yellow River Plateau, Yellow Earth. It's incredibly beautiful. It's also the most incredibly denuded land. It's centuries of being overplowed. And these areas, there's very little that can be grown there. However, there are dates, and I guess I'm pausing. I wanted people to notice the dates because I'll go back to it later. Okay. And at that time, they were, people do not visit these areas. You have to go to Inner Mongolia, take a bus, and then walk. And if someone's not meeting you from the village, you're just not going to find it. You're going to be really in trouble. There's no hotels, there's no roads, there's no cars. And they were so thrilled and so welcoming. In order to stay there, it meant we had to sleep with them on their bed. There's no place to put you. So when we left, the entire village walks you to the edge of the cliff, and everyone's crying. It's such a thrill for them to have people come and visit them, and these are the poorest of the poor. So basically, what can they give you? They really want to thank you. And as you're leaving, every single orifice, I would say, every single pocket on your body and your cleavage, everything, they just stuffed it with dates. And I'm like pouring dates. And they were incredible tasting dates. They were soaked in wine. And this is a date inside of these steamed breads. Okay, so Chinese medicine, I think a lot of people are familiar with the term traditional Chinese medicine. This history, very often what's used and referred to is the Materia Medica from Ming Dynasty, which does include Yijia that Eric mentioned. And as Eric mentioned, the big trend right now is the donkey hide glue. We have a 3,000-year tradition. Actually, I've seen some places say 2005, 2000. In any case, an ancient tradition for its blood strengthening, invigorating, tonic. On a more informal level, I always associate it with the use for women. And of course, that the skins are boiled, and from using the infamous black, large, local Shandong donkeys, or in theory, that's what's happening. So boiling the donkey hide. Here are those black, beautiful donkeys. Okay, so, this product is mentioned in many historical texts, novels, televised soap operas, dramas, and it's always in the context of the imperial court. So it's a luxury item. It's something that local common people would not be using or have access to. It's beyond their means. And and thus there are all these incredible stories how the beautiful skin of the concubine is all due to Yijia, and so-and-so's health was cured or saved from dying due to this medicine. Oops. What had happened? Okay, sorry. So, in order to understand this history, how did we get to here? How did we get to this incredible state of ravaging? I think it's really important to look at history. And not just look at, back when I met Amy, I went back 100 years, and now I'm going back 200 years. And I think it's really critical. Everyone, when they talk about demand, they talk about since the economic reforms. They're talking about from the 80s on. And I think you actually have to go even further back to understand a certain kind of national psyche, why we have such consumer trends. Why are they so difficult to stop? Why is it that you have so many nonprofit organizations working on so many of these issues, and it has been essentially unchallenged? And I think history tells us a lot of the answers. Okay, so the China of today is a global superpower, but the nation was once referred to as the sick man of East Asia. In 1839 to 49 as the century of humiliation. The China of the past was not seeking expansion or to fill her cabinets with wonders of other nations. She was battling the, oops. Oh, I'm missing a slide, I'm sorry. Okay, she was battling the imperial forces to keep her doors closed. While Westerners might view this history as mere footnotes, among Chinese, this tragic history stirs up emotions, nationalism, and defiance of outside influence. And I have to say, as a Chinese American, you would think I'm like really far away from this 200 years ago history, but it is instilled in me too as well, because my parents grew up during the Japanese occupation, running from Shanghai, Nanjing. My mother was a child during the Nanjing massacre. My dad would also even refer to, even though it's before his time, when the British forced the Chinese in order to open up their ports and get at the tea, the porcelain, the china, to trade opium, to accept opium in exchange for tea. So, what is China's remedy for this century of suffering? That was the 100-year dream. Okay? Her reclamation of national pride, honor, and status in the world. This dream began in 1949 with the birth of the People's Republic of China. Mao Zedong, as the president of the Communist Party, declared, "The Chinese people have stood up. My strength uproots the mountains, and my energy dominated the world." Mao proclaimed, "People must conquer nature." So during the Great Leap Forward to catch up with the West, the forests were fed to the furnace. With the ensuing Great Famine, survival meant stealing, killing anything that moved. Cannibalism even occurred. The forests were emptied of animals, the trees of its leaves. So one of the early campaigns of the Great Leap Forward was to exterminate the tiger, as well as the wolves, the leopards. They were considered enemies of the people. They killed the livestock. And with that, they put a bounty on the head of the tiger. And in a few years, the numbers fell from 4,000 to 1,000. Another early campaign was the Great Sparrow Campaign, who, like the tigers, were considered an enemy, a threat to the grain. Later, it was realized that the sparrows actually ate insects, and a plague ensued. Mao did not consult any scientists, and whatever he decreed became a must. Everyone just followed anything. No one dared to counter his policies. And if you look at that cart to the right, you see all those small little bodies? Those are sparrows. And this was like an incredibly organized campaign. From the young to the old, everyone was mobilized to help out, and using everything possible, from pots and pans to make sounds so that the sparrows were always scared. They could never even settle down and perch on a branch. After a while, these sparrows were dropping out of exhaustion. Okay. Oh my God, these slides are, sorry. Okay, so TCM is a communist project. And the Barefoot Doctor's Manual, it emphasized a basic need for medical care to be spread to the hinterlands. And rather than any of these tiger bone and rhino horn or egel, this was something very, very basic, essential, and it emphasized the use of local and easy accessible herbs. And it really, as far as any kind of animal products, it was just a few things like centipedes and, again, things that were just local. So now we have the Cultural Revolution. Violence was normalized with public purges, beatings, and executions. Even cats were targeted as a symbol of the bourgeois and seen lying dead by the roadside with their front paws tied together. Children accused their parents, students their teachers, in an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. The economy collapsed. The Cultural Revolution ended with Mao's death in 1976. So at this time, all trust is lost. Because everything is sort of flipped inside out, the world is sort of inside out. Okay. So this is Babao Shan, and the top row has my family members, and this is known as the Cemetery for National Heroes of the Revolution. And actually, this is very ironic in my family because no one was a revolutionary hero. They all died as a result of the revolution. So the top left is my granduncle, who's considered one of the founders of modern physics in China. And then to the second to the left is my grandparents. So my grandfather was a student political activist. He was a leader, expelled from the colleges, jailed for 2 years. They actually used to periodically take all his belongings from the jail cell and say, we're going to shoot you today. And then it wouldn't happen. They would do this again and again and again. It was sort of a psychological torture. All the way to the right is my uncle, who actually got his PhD in the US, and being a good oldest son, he went back to China and was purged. He was also a physicist. So, with the end of the Cultural Revolution and with Mao's death, now we have economic reforms and Deng Xiaoping. So this also, among many other things, is the largest mass migration of rural to urban that comes with income inequality, fierce job competition. Farmers are unable to compete with urbanites. You have fake companies, fake medicine, fake wine, fake everything, and China becomes the leading source of counterfeit products. So I want to point out these changes that has occurred even in language. So philosophical underpinnings are changing. And these two basic things I'm going to refer to a lot is this notion of what's intelligent. Now you have the dictionary meaning, 聪明, intelligence, which I always interpreted to mean your actual intellectual intelligence. But it really is changed over time. This is about cunning, about your ability to manipulate, your ability to take advantage of someone, to cheat someone, essentially. And actually that's considered as a positive. You're getting over someone. When I had a conversation with my cousin's son, and we were talking about Rao Yutai, who's the founder of modern physics, and I was saying, you know, we really should be proud of him. You know, he founded the physics department in Fudan University, in Beijing University. You know, his students and later students, there's a legacy in physics, and they are now the Nobel Prize winners in physics. So, and he was like, there's nothing to be proud of. He really scoffed at this whole notion. He's like, they're ghosts. I don't want to have anything to do with them. And he compared it as like, you know, what would be great if they were, you know, like Li and Yang, who are the Nobel Prize winners. He's like, look at them. He's like, he has a wife that's 40 years younger than him. You know, and he's like, that's really something. And he held up his thumb. And he was just disgusted at our relatives. Why? Because they ended up dying. He had to commit suicide in order to keep his integrity, instead of being forced to do a false confession, to turn on his other colleagues, to say that they're Taiwanese spies when they were actually loyal to China and stayed in China. So you can see how things have been warped, and it's these younger generations. I think the centuries of history has really kind of warped their perception, their philosophy, their view of life, and what's necessary to get by in life. Also, a very unfortunate factor is what's changed on the whole issue of females and the rise of the mistress culture. Mistress cities, it considered as this is like a norm in order to have social status as a high-ranking official or as someone who is a CEO of a company, that it's become a accessory is the word, to have 2 or more mistresses. So we have economic reforms, and there's really this push for entrepreneurs to find different ways of making money. And with that came bear ball farming. And this began in the early 1980s, and 10,000 captive bears. And you can see it's got this, it's got like a cage around its chest, and you see down below is where it's being milked for its bile. So that means it's an open, its insides are open, and generally the bile has pus and blood inside of it. These bears are very sick. They're kept their entire lives in a cage where they usually can't even move around. Generally, when they're rescued, they end up having to have their gallbladders removed. And what this did is once you have a market, and it's the same thing with the donkey skins, you have a market, you have these captive animals, well then you've got to make more products. So it's not just the bear bile itself, you've got bear bile shampoo, you have bear bile toothpaste, you have to have all these different types, and you get very innovative or creative in the types of products. So new products appeared that are not connected to traditional Chinese medicine. I should also mention is that there are synthetic substitutes, but it's always believed that the real is more valuable, it's more expensive, it should have more inherent qualities to it. So real wild bear is preferred over captive bear. So what it does is it creates a wildlife trafficking market. So I know it's not donkey, but I feel like they're all related, is deboning the tiger, I call it. So in '86, the South China tiger is heading towards extinction, so that's when you open up a tiger farm. This is funded by the government. And the main thing is for tiger bone wine and tiger bone products. So in 1988, we have the WPL, the Wildlife Protection Law, which ironically doesn't really protect wildlife. And it mainly encourages the farming of protected animals and provides licenses. At this time, it's the state who is giving the licenses to individuals. Also want to add that with the tiger farms, 5,000 tigers, those products, there's been all these investigations, EIA did one, those products are actually all being sent to high-level officials. Those are the only ones who can afford tiger bone wine. So, 1989, the infamous Tiananmen Square massacre among Chinese, it's known as June 4th. And I would say that, to this day, I talk to my Chinese students, and all of them, they know that something happened and that there were lots of people in the square, but what happened, they really don't know. It's kind of a blur. And it's, of course, not taught. This is a highly taboo topic. Even many of the topics of the Cultural Revolution, for example, my uncle's death, it's only recently that has been acknowledged, that he committed suicide, that he was purged, that the day before he was going to be paraded and beaten up in the streets, that he committed suicide. That's only very, very recent, in the past few years, that that's been spoken about. So 1989 is not a good year for elephants, not a good year for students. So this is really running parallel to Africa's elephants suddenly plummeting. So then they're put on Appendix 1 and CITES, and they're given all these protections. However, in 1999, under pressure from Japan, CITES most unfortunately, and this could have been a total turning point, but they actually do a one-off sale of ivory. And that just catapulted it back again. I was in China in 95 to 98, and at that point, 95, 96, ivory was really just not in the stores. If there was, it was just a small amount, and it was really looking more like something that people were not interested in anymore. So it was really looking successful, the original protections under Appendix 1, but that sale changed everything. And then back to the donkeys, we're noticing that there are 11 million at that time. There's a fall in donkey prices. The government insists that the prices get fixed. Okay? Instead of this up and down pricing, it now has to be stable. At that time also, there were two schools of donkey production, one in Shanghai and then one in the north. That's the dominant one. And of course, China's policy of going out to Africa, 1995, and all the infrastructure projects. And while it's, there's a lot of controversies of saying whether or not the positives and the negatives of the infrastructure projects, but we do know that with that came an influx of Chinese nationals and a rise in wildlife crime. That is a definite. And of particular note is that the first wave from Shuidong, which is a small village in Guangdong province, they also went in the 90s. Now we know that they're already on their second generation. They originally went with the intention of sea cucumber trade, but quickly switched over to ivory and now pangolins. And they have been untouched, regardless of the ban. So I just want to comment about the wealthy, because everything is always about demand for Chinese wealthy, the elite wealthy, the Chinese millionaires. So I just wanted to comment about that, because there's a perception that there are so many wealthy people, but the reality is 1/3 of the wealth is in 1% of the population. And it's notable that 104 of the upper ranks of the Communist Party, 45 of them are in the NPC, 59 in the top advisory group. So what does this mean? This is saying that the very wealthy are part of the government. And how did so much money end up in so few hands? So there was this policy of state enterprises, and the biggest e-gel company was a state enterprise. It was formed in 1952. And then they had this change of it going into private hands and being on the stock market. And what it also did was put a lot of money in very few people's hands. Just an example of conspicuous consumption. So here it is in 2007. And it's covered in dragons. There are 100 dragons, one big one, all out of ivory. And this was to raise funds for the Guangzhou Asian Games. And you note the female to the side of the car. So coincidentally, to this conspicuous consumption. In 2008, again under pressure, CITES has another one-off sale. So these are sales of stockpiles that technically are legal sales. And then in the stores, how do you know what's legal and illegal? And what it does is create a perception that, oh, it's okay to buy ivory now. Ivory's back. And we know that the government was issuing these all these TV announcements and shows about buy ivory. Ivory is white gold. So it was promoted. Also, now throughout Beijing, there are about 5 restaurants, and then spreading through most of China are restaurants, a chain of restaurants that sell. Their particular emphasis on their menu is what I call these Viagra menus. It's geared to middle-aged men, and they're very expensive. You could drop about $500 on a meal, and it features penis, testicles from various animals. So we've got cow, camel, deer, dog, donkey. And you can have other things like deer face dish, or women can have placenta dishes. And then while they're eating, while the men are bonding and eating and drinking, there's a female waitress who comes over and describes while you're eating whatever animal, whether it's the ox or the donkey, she will describe their physical characteristics as you're eating. So the idea is that somehow from eating this, from consuming it, you will gain those characteristics. Here we have the donkey penis dish. I think this doesn't need comment. So the donkey penis confiscated at New Zealand airport. It's a Chinese man. Okay, so we have the Shandong company, and their shares are rising. We have aggressive marketing on television, chat sites. And so egel has changed. You know, earlier on, it was something that middle-aged women mainly used. It was expensive. It was a present. I remember a friend of mine, a Chinese friend of mine, their family was given a present for his mother. And then she didn't use it, and she passed away, and he gave it to me to give to my mother. So it's mainly something for women, middle-aged, or someone when they're pregnant. But now it's changed. With all this marketing, it's for all ages. And it's, instead of it just having its blood-boosting qualities, it's considered like a healthy cracker. So that it's being promoted for all different ages, whether it's teenagers and even really young children, and as a food product. So a food product is completely different. You don't have regulation, you don't have someone prescribing how much, and with that it becomes cheaper as a food product. It's also a national cultural heritage item. There's now a national association. And getting back to those wildlife protection laws, I think this is really critical to look at, and this is quite shocking because 2016 was the opportunity of a lifetime as far as wildlife goes. There was so much hopes, and there was really a large public comment period or a wildlife conservation group period where they were putting input about what they felt the laws should be changed to. But in the end, commercial interests won out. The economic reforms kind of attitude of go, go, go. Animal products as assets, as commodities won out. So what happened here is in anything, it went backwards. So now it's animals that are protected could be used for breeding purposes and performances. And now the licensing, this is critical, is no longer at the state level, it's brought to the provincial level. Okay, so if you think about it from that, what does that mean? That means that you're going to succumb more to local interests. There's less oversight. So this is quite dangerous. And Beijing has been very defiant about, there's been a lot of criticism, needless to say, they've been very defiant about this. It's really considered, these are our national assets. And instead of worrying about the extinction of tigers and lions and, you know, you name the animal, it's in trouble, right? And that's a growing list. Instead of being worried about that, the comment is TCM. We're worried about TCM going extinct if we don't use the authentic, rare, the authentic animal product. So the idea is not a synthetic. So again, as everywhere else in the world, the donkey is a beast of burden. Its meat is also eaten. And so you have donkey burgers and this notion of, you know, dragon meat is what's eaten in heaven, but on earth we've got donkey meat, right? Again, with the counterfeit products, you know, this is, I think it's hard for people to imagine here, but the reality is an average person in China has to worry about everything being fake. It's very hard to tell. The packaging is nearly identical. There's been so much efforts put at reproducing exact duplicate packages. So you don't know, is your medicine real or fake? So you want to buy the more expensive version in the hopes that it's real. And when China's donkey numbers dwindled, what happened? There's not enough donkeys, and thus all these fake products. So they're using other animals. And in some cases, even shoes were thrown in. So I just want to point out that also at the same point, China is spending a huge amount of money on soft power and trying to raise its international profile. Because that's also part of Mao Zedong's dream, the 100 years of dream, and we're still in that time period. It's not till 2049 that this 100-year dream is over and on to the next dream. So this is a concern, is that spending billions really to soft power propaganda to the rest of the world. And in the US, we have Confucian institutes, which everyone has thought of as really wonderful, benign, spreading cultural heritage, Mandarin classes, but it is actually found to be that it's really difficult once you join up with a Confucian institute. We're trying to actually build a building, a gallery, a center in your university, that if you want to pull out, if you find this suddenly to be changing or shifting in the tone, that is very difficult to de-entangle yourself. It's like Belt and Rail or infrastructure projects. And what has happened is that once you start to talk about Chinese history and get into any of the modern history realities, that's taboo topics. Okay, so now you're bunting heads with the Chinese government. So there are all these various nonprofits that look like, oh, it's a cultural nonprofit, which in fact it's actually an arm of the Communist Party. So this is also inviting foreigners, worldwide photographers to come experience traditional Chinese medicine. And of course, we have the reality of what's happening in Africa. And this notion that perhaps this is the new ivory, and the price of donkeys going up to 300 per skin, which makes it unaffordable for farmers. They're being stolen. Farmers are waking up to finding their beast, their burden, their livelihood, their everything stolen, skinned. So the prices are soaring. And this is not just in Africa, South America as well, Australia. So there's a lot being to promote it as a health tonic, as something that is a source of great cultural pride. And I'm not arguing at all any of the medicinal elements. I'm just sort of putting it in the structure of the greater world. I don't think it's in any way wise to go against TCM and say to people, oh, it doesn't work. Those campaigns where they talk about rhino horn as just being nails, I feel like if someone believes that, those campaigns don't work, right? If anything, they're insulting. If anything, it makes someone want to dig down further and believe it even more. So I feel like a lot of the Western campaigns have not been effective. You can see it's come to New York City, Times Square. So we have the Yijiao cake as an ad. Okay, so now it's imports of donkeys are doubling. We are having more and more products. Their shares are rising, and you have this is interesting, is that people are buying up the stocks. So again, you're talking about a large amount of money in a small number of hands. So this is really interesting. This past Chinese New Year, there was a bit of a to-do online. So you had one of the hotlines, the national health hotlines of the Family Planning Association, actually putting out a statement that Yijiao is overrated, it's overpriced, and suggesting that there are other sources. So this was really setting to warn the average person. But this caused a major to-do. This caused a furor. And again, I feel like this is something where you're telling people something they don't want to hear. Okay, so they actually had to scratch it and wipe it off their site. So you can see even within China, there's this kind of conflict going on. This is more about the fury over the efficacy. So now we have e-gel in like a huge array of products. My Chinese students and I were sort of tracking this on the online chat sites, and really these days a lot of it is targeting to the young. So college student age, young moms, but you see the range of products. It's no longer the standard cake format that gets boiled. Now we have it in almost like a potato chip kind of cracker form. You also have it in pill form. You also have it in a date form. And now it's this attractive packaging. It's not this old-fashioned medicinal type of packaging. Here's some more. It's no longer the domain of women. You now see it for male virility. One of these, it's hard to see, but on the second row, the fourth one, you see a very, very young child eating it, really young, like 3, 4-year-old. So it's really widened, it's gone mainstream. No longer the domain of very, very elite people, imperial. It's also, the West has absorbed it too as well. You see discussions about it. Now it's a beauty cream. This is on the stores in New York City. They were on sale, and now they're in tin boxes. It's now used as a gift. I mean, Chinese culture, the whole notion of gifting and is very, very deeply ingrained. Always looking for gift products. So here they are, and they're on sale, 3 for $33. What's really interesting about these is that if you look at the ingredient list, they are not mentioning the donkey skin. So you see a picture here. You see the picture of the donkey, and they say the word, they say in English, e-gel, and they have that written in Chinese, but they don't list ingredient. This is actually an issue with the FDA, and it's also misleading. I have all these Chinese students that actually never knew that it contained donkey in it. So here we have the ingredient list. Here we have the date products now, dates that have e-gel in them or purport to have it. I think it's a very, very small percentage. So here it is mixed with, you can see it with canned fruits, and then to the right is candies, and this is like in the cookie candy aisle. And I don't know if you could see it. It also has labeling that shows that it's on, CCTV recommends this. That's the state media, state news. So I look at all different things for cultural indicators. And in the funerary stores near, in Chinatown, near the funeral homes, they have these stores where you can buy paper objects, and there's that belief that you can send this to the dead, right? So if you think about it, this stems from ancient times when in reality they were actually killing a horse or a donkey to send to the person who was deceased. But later on, that's like not practical, it's very expensive. So paper was the alternative. So it's a paper image of something, a paper replica. So here we have a paper replica of the set of desirable items. So let's look at what's in those items. You've got ginseng, wild ginseng, right, not farmed. On the bottom there, we have the gold coin fish, which is also called the totoaba. All the way to the right, that's shark fin. On the top, that's the deer horn. And then what's that in the middle on the upper row, that's the ijao. Okay, so this is, and then in the middle there is the white truffles. But you can see, this is something in everyone's hearts. It's up there with the gold coin ma. And speaking of which, I think I want to use this as a comparison because this was a fish that probably a lot of people are not so aware of. It swims in the water of California and Mexico, and because it had the misfortune of being golden colored, and colloquial, it's known as a gold coin fish, and it has a very large swim bladder. So that swim bladder is highly desirable. It's eaten as a delicacy, and it was actually traded as a commodity. The bladders were traded, and what that did is it made the price soar. It went up to $40,000 a bladder. Okay, and when you traded that furiously, like with stocks, eventually it falls. So now it's at $20,000 a bladder. So what is that doing? It's causing the extinction of the totoaba and the bahaba. These two fishes are very similar. They both have very large swim bladders. And most unfortunately for the vaquita, which is the world's smallest porpoise, who happens to get caught in those nets. At this point, the vaquita is under 20. So extinction this year, I would imagine. So this is all tied in. So I made these, getting back to these, so I bought this from that shop. So these are just paper boxes. There's nothing inside. The idea is that you burn it and send it to your mother, your aunt, and it's something maybe she never had, that she could never afford to have. So now you're sending it to her. It's like really your heart, that you're sending her this valuable thing. And it's really unfortunate that those shops all have things like fake Gucci watches, you know, designer things, iPhones. It's all like commodities, luxury products. It's nothing about really the love for your mother, okay, or your love for the person in the more heartfelt way. It's all through products. So I bought these, and then as an artist, I was looking at them, examining them, so that's why I made a tray and trying to show people, this is what's inside. When you buy that, you're buying the death of the vaquita. Or when you're getting the donkey skin product, this is what's happening to the donkeys. But this is really a very difficult and complicated argument to even sell. There's a lot of, you know, refusal, denial. I think for some people they are willing to accept it. For others, it's just, this is the trend. This is what everyone's buying. One of the students who was doing this, and she was like collecting ads, and it's also her former classmates have now gotten into ijao trade, or another one, her former classmate is in the manta ray trade, moved to Solomon Island for it. Another one is in the shark fin trade. So when you start to like kind of counter what their thinking is, you know, she was saying that I think most of my friends, they don't care. They don't care that this is fake or that it's causing some other problem. The idea that this is what everyone wants. So this is a hard kind of discussion to have. I can't say that no one cares, but when it's a trend and everyone else is buying it, it's a really hard thing to counter, right? And there's always the belief that I paid so much for this, mine is real, or mine isn't stolen, mine is genuine, right? So that's the back of the set. So again, about the finances behind this, and really at this point, it's become such a huge commodity, and being as like the token symbol of traditional Chinese medicine. So it's heavily pushed, and there's so much economic gain. So the idea is to extend the supply chain to Central Asia, South America, and have a wide range of products. Again, when you have the farming, then you need to have even more products, right? So donkey milk, donkey cream. And I'm including this. This is not donkeys, but this is my current thing that keeps me up at night, is the elephant skin craze. This is already a few years old, and it is what is wiping out Asia's elephants. And this really gained traction very quickly, and it's the work of one wildlife trader, a female, who invented this product. It's mainly coming out of Myanmar, and she actually just came up with it. So it's the subcutaneous skin layer of elephants, and these are Asian elephants. So the idea is they don't need to have tusks anymore. They've got skin. So entire herds are skinned, and very often right after they've died, or probably while they're still alive. And it's being pushed now that the idea is that this incredible redness, that blood red, is gotten while it's just freshly killed. And that's why it's happening that some of them are still alive as they're being skinned. Okay, and then it's polished to this degree where it's almost like glass-like. And the most ironic thing is that these beads are being called prayer beads, Buddhist prayer beads. So the total irony. So this is the current fear across Asia, Myanmar in particular. It's like on the border. So this trader is stationed right at the border. She has a constant supply. There's no worry. China has actually given all these permits for elephant skins, as well as now they're starting to buy them up in Africa. Chinese buyers are starting to appear at the skin auctions in Africa, and those skins are already tanned, but now they're talking about using them for soups. And that would be completely toxic for people to be eating soups made of tanned skins, right? All the chemicals used to tan a hide, so that is totally not healthy. But that is like the mindset of an entrepreneurial, overly creative, very scary trader, right? And of course, the other fear is that, what's happening is that we're creating, generations upon generations of traumatized animals. And my real fear with that 2016 revised WPL is this notion of farming, breeding, use for entertainment, and then for more products. And it looks like elephants are on that list. There was a report from the elephant family, and the idea is to use increased research in artificial insemination and products. Now there's a surge in elephant products from their trunk to their tail to their penis, you name it. It's really not just about ivory anymore. And then the greatest, largest issue is Belt and Rail. 68 countries, it's really China going global on a biblical scale. And one of the main initiatives of Belt and Rail is the spread of TCM. And I don't mean to sound at all that I'm against TCM. I mean, TCM can mean so many different things. That's the whole thing. In the US, it's generally associated with things like acupuncture, massage, holistic healing, and herbs, essential oils. So, and those herbs are generally herbs, not animal products, right? So it means different things depending on how it's utilized as a phrase, and how it's manipulated. So, and I guess this is, I know I'm getting into politics here, but just the reality of what it means when China goes global. What has been happening this past year as Xi Jinping removed the term limits, and now he could really be president for life. And what people are feeling is a return to Maoist ways of thinking, authoritarian rule, with the removal of Christ pictures and putting his instead. And there's a real serious clampdown about words, what you can say, what you cannot say. Even the word Winnie the Pooh cannot be said now. It's the code phrase for making fun of the president. And also all the growing missing people. And of course, the million Muslims who have been detained. And these are the, and now they've actually admitted it. It's actually as a policy, and they're calling them work education camps. But it's really thinking reform. So this is again going back to the Mao days. So I just wanted to leave with some slight positives. I know it's really hard. It was actually, when I was putting this all together, it was very traumatizing and depressing. But I can say a few positive things, is that, you know, China itself has 150 homegrown animal welfare groups. That's huge in a really short period of time, and those are homegrown. At one point, there were only 20. So this is really the younger generation stepping up, changing their concepts. There's also ACT Asia is incredible. They teach compassionate education, and it's not like a one-year project. It's through 10 years of a child's development. But it's not in every province. It's not throughout China. So that's stepping up. You know, the dog meat trade actually really promoted animal welfare groups to step up. And as Chinese people start to learn to be better pet owners and understand more about the needs of animals, then they are kind of starting to step up on that. And also, again, the entrepreneurial spirit. Peter Lee of the Humane Society did research. A lot of those dog meat traders are actually rural peasants who don't have farmland anymore. They're desperate to make money. So they don't have the means to breed dogs for the dog meat trade. So instead, it's stolen dogs. It's stealing people's pets. Those dogs very often have a collar on them. They're purebred dogs. They're fancy dogs. But no one cares. The idea is to quickly get it. It's a quick buck. So that's actually causing so much horror and outcry from the Chinese public. I mean, their dogs are being stolen. And you know, there was one that went viral. It was a little girl who went running into the street, and she found her dog there, skinned, slaughtered, you know, about to be chopped up for food. So there's an outcry from the Chinese people. And then a lot of conflict, depending on the province. Some provinces are getting better. In some provinces, the police are cracking down even harder. And actually beating dogs because they're thought of as pests. So there's a lot of conflict. There's also a big vegan movement and a vegetarian movement happening in Shanghai. It's not the dominant thing, but it's a growing movement. Also the concept of an ecological civilization, I feel like that's yet to be determined what that really means, but that concept is out there. So there's contradictions. And then, you know, in the literature, film world, and arts and culture, you see a lot of irony and acerbic writing. But it's in literature versus nonfiction, right? Because you really can't criticize the government. But I just want to point out, I know I ran out of time, but the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, Mo Yan, so his book, The Wine Republic, which actually was written in the 90s, that tells the story of a journalist going in, because he hears stories about, oh, in this one area, the government officials, they are eating baby boys as a banquet meal. Of course, this is fiction, right? So you have to exaggerate reality. So he goes in and he wants to report on it. And what ends up happening? They lure him in, so he becomes part of the banquet. By drinking and eating with them and also eating those baby boy fetuses, he becomes part of it. So he can't report on it. So, but you see the type of writing that's happening. And this is really criticizing the government. The blockbuster hit, which was Monster Hunt, it wasn't big here in the US, but it was huge in China. That was set in ancient times, but what was it about? So you have what I equate to as poachers, right? So you have the monster hunters, and they want to kill these very rare monsters that are fleeing. I also equate it a little bit with Tibet too, and they're fleeing, you know, trying to find safety. But one by one, those monster hunters end up feeling more compassionate for the monster, right? And they end up flipping. They become monster protectors. And what are these monsters being killed for? They're being sought for to be fed to the elite royalty, right? And there's a scene where they push out this cart and there's this little cute monster, it's still alive, and You know, they're going to cut up his head and eat him, and this is going to have these wonderful health benefits. And in the end, he's saved. This was a hit in China, and I feel it's a definite message inside, and somehow it passed the censors because it's historical. So the signs that these are sort of percolating in these times I think that's a positive sign. And that there are individuals who are daring in this very, very repressed climate, they're daring to speak out and request a policy. If you look at so it's a Buddhist from Hubei, and he actually dared to submit a proposal to end bear bile farming. Or this artist who's on the advisory board who submitted a proposal to close the tiger farms. So the fact that individuals are trying, I think is positive. And also there's the pressure of what's happening in the rest of the world. We are trying to everyone is becoming more animal welfare conscious. You know, Vietnam is closing all its bear bile farms. They're also going elephant cruelty free in one of their major national parks. So things are changing around China. So it's to be seen how this will be played out. Thank you.